I'm Christina, and welcome to a new episode of Salty Critics Corner. Today we'll be talking all about banned books. What are they? Why are people banning books? And what are a couple of banned books that you should definitely read? Let's get started. First of all, what are banned books and why are they getting banned in the first place? Banned books aren't exactly what it says on the box. Let's call it different degrees of banning, really, and what it depends mostly on is who is actually doing the banning. So, for example, Lady Chatterley's Lover, D.H. Lawrence, this was a book banned in England, and it meant that bookshops just weren't allowed to carry it, at least not openly, really. But if you were found in possession of this book, or if you were trying to get it, nothing really would happen to you. Contrast that with the Satanic Verses by Salman Rushdie, which is banned in Iran, and the author is literally on a hit list. Well, if you're caught owning that book in Iran or trying to sell it or trying to get a hold of it, let's just say you might get into quite a bit of trouble. Nowadays, whenever we hear about banned books in the media, it's more often than not actually in the United States, and it's very specific to each state what they're banning. Now, the impact is mostly on what public libraries can carry, so not so much on actual bookshops or obviously on what you or your friends can own. To be honest, at least in our opinion, banning a book in North America, it's more or less an advertisement for that book. It kind of puts the novel on the map. And, well, since we salty critics are all about advertising books, let's get down to a couple banned novels that you should absolutely read. First banned book you need to read is the OG, Fahrenheit 451, Ray Bradbury. Just to give you a bit of an idea about the plot, Guy Montag is a fireman. His job is to destroy books. Books are illegal. Society has moved on to other forms of entertainment, an immersive form of television that's projected into people's homes. This kind of television is actually referred to as a family, and it has a really addictive quality, which I'm sure we can all kind of recognize a little bit from social media. But the turning point is when he meets his new neighbor, Clarice, and she reminds him that there was a time when books were very common. It was how people communicated, and slowly but surely introduces him to this subversive cell of people who are trying to keep books alive. And this is pretty much the whole book. I'm obviously not going to spoil it. There's a bit of a twist ending. And what I wanted to mention is really why you need to start with this one. It's, like I said, it's just the OG book about banning books. And it might not be banned anymore, but if you want to learn more about why books get banned in the first place and why authoritarians usually find novels so subversive and dangerous, well, Fahrenheit 451 is the best example. It was written during the McCarthy era in the 1950s in America, so peak Red Scare. This was actually a fear, whether it was imaginary or not, of communism taking over America. This was at its peak, and Bradbury actually cites the Nazis, of course, in their book burning practices as inspiration. And he mentions that he wrote this novel to basically exercise his fear that the same thing would happen in America as well, that they would just start burning books all of a sudden. Over the years, he kind of changed his motivation, to be honest, and you see him saying that this was actually a commentary on how mass media reduces literacy and discourages people from reading novels. But then he's also said that it's a metaphor for political correctness, and how this is actually a code word for censorship, and how it's really the ultimate form of thought control. So honestly, make of this what you will. At the end of the day, it's the best book to start with if you want to understand why novels get banned in the first place. The next banned book you need to read is The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. And I'm sure a lot more of you are familiar with this book thanks to the series, and I've definitely got thoughts on the series as well. Not all of them are good, but for those of you who are unfamiliar with it, basically Handmaid's Tale tells the story of the Republic of Gilead through the eyes of Offred, who's a handmaiden, And these handmaidens are the last women who are able to give birth. Everyone else is sterile for undisclosed reasons, but namely, you kind of get a feeling that it has to do with climate change. And these handmaidens are forced into serving the families of powerful individuals and provide them with children. How do they do this? Well, I'm sure this is probably the part that most people are familiar with. There's this monthly ritualistic impregnation thing going on. But this isn't some alternate world or dystopia, which I think is the most interesting thing about the novel. It actually takes place in something akin to the present. Interestingly enough, neither Claudia nor I genuinely enjoy Margaret Atwood's writing, to be honest. But if you do like her writing, you like her energy, and even if you might just be curious, we'd still recommend you start with Handmaid's Tale, and that's for a very simple reason. The first part of the novel shows Offred just living her normal life, meeting with her husband, meeting with her friends, going about her job, and you see this TV in the background, and it keeps talking about this new fundamentalist party winning votes. Suddenly, more laws get passed. Offred and her female colleagues are fired, so they're not allowed to work anymore. The government freezes their assets, their credit cards, and they can no longer own property. So slowly but surely, the world morphs into Gilead. And what I thought when I read about it is this is such a realistic depiction of how things can change in such a believable way. And the book actually was written in, I think, the 80s, and it references everything from American Puritanism to the Iranian Revolution to the various moral panics that America experienced throughout its history. And when the novel came out, it was genuinely ripe for banning. It has these incredibly graphic and violent scenes. And not only that, but it also exposes the hypocrisy of the ruling class. And for all these reasons, the novel was obviously banned, or it's been put on these controversial lists of novels in America that you really shouldn't let your children read. And I'm honestly not advocating any children read Handmaid's Tale. Like I said, it's very, very graphic. So definitely proceed with care. Pretty much every trigger warning you can think of, it will apply to this book. And fun fact, I'm full of fun facts today, but Atwood's own ancestor, a woman named Mary Webster, was accused of witchcraft in Puritan New England, and the novel itself is dedicated to her. So yeah, another fun fact. Next banned novel is Kafka on the Shore by Haruki Murakami. And it's complicated to tell you what this novel is about, like many Murakami novels. The only thing I can say is that it's a Murakami novel, and it has all the fun things a fan would love, and a first-time reader would kind of need to experience on their own to really understand. So you get this faithfully named character, Kafka, obviously, a prophecy, a painting, characters who are destined to meet, and so fate brings them together. There's obviously talking cats, otherwise it wouldn't be a Murakami novel. But yeah, I think that's the plot, weirdly enough. I wanted to talk about this book mainly because I was really surprised to see it on a banned books list. I couldn't really come up with a reason why this book, out of all of Murakami's novel, why Kafka on the Shore, would get banned. From what I understand, it scandalized some politicians. And yeah, I wanted to include it because I thought it was funny. Especially because Kafka on the Shore is probably one of his tamer novels. All of his books have questionable plot points in them. They all have a lot of male characters having dubious interactions with a lot of underage, sort of manic pixie girl female characters. So if that's something you're sensitive to, probably Murakami is not the writer for you. But I would say that Kafka on the Shore is definitely not the worst offender. And if you think about it, it's not even people's gateway into Murakami. More often than not, I don't think I've ever heard anyone saying this was their first Murakami novel. I would probably say Norwegian Wood would be the one that would deserve the ban more because it's people's gateway more often than not into this writer. So yeah, that's pretty much what I have to say. Obviously, read Kafka on the Shore. I don't even think it's his best novel necessarily, but at least it's a funny one. The next banned book you need to read is The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. And this is pretty much the exact opposite of our previous book. And it's, yes, very serious. The Bluest Eye tells the story of a young African-American girl. She's named Pecola, and she grew up during the Great Depression. This story is set in 40s America in Ohio, I think. And it's about how she's consistently regarded as ugly due to her mannerisms and, of course, her race. As a result, she develops an inferiority complex, and this fuels her desire throughout the novel to have blue eyes, which she equates with beauty, respectability, and love. And again, I'm not going to delve too deep into the plot necessarily, because its very nature, its very aim is to be disturbing, and for good reason. The book was banned because it has offensive language, it has explicit material, and it really covers a lot of controversial issues, including child abuse. This was Toni Morrison's debut novel, and why I think it's so important for everyone to read it is because these are real things, these are things that happened. So the fact that books like these get banned is basically people trying to sweep under the rug what is just a real event for millions of people. And this is such a vivid evocation of fear, of loneliness, and especially a child's yearning. It's a tragedy, and it's a fulfillment, and it's a devastating novel. And not just because of Pecola's tragedy, but because it explores the value of being female, the value of girlhood, and how this was morphed through the eyes of society at the time. The novel isn't even narrated by Pecola, it's narrated by one of the children of the family that takes her into foster care. And again, the reason for its ban, very similar to Handmaid's Tale, isn't even the graphic nature of the novel, but it's the fact that it exposes the intrinsic illogicality of racism. It shows the consequences, the multi-generational consequences, and it is a shocking book because it's written without metaphors. It's simply aiming to reveal the fact to an audience that for so long just pretended that this wasn't really happening in their backyard. So yeah, the fact that it's still so controversial to this day shows how timeless the novel is. And of course, how Toni Morrison managed to tell a story that unfortunately is so familiar to so many people. So yeah, definitely The Bluest Eye, absolutely on any to-read list. Our next novel is one that you used to hear a lot more about, but not so much recently. So this is Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close by Jonathan Safran Foer. The story is narrated by Oscar Schell, who is this little boy whose dad passed away in the 9/11 attacks and leaves him this mysterious key that he needs to find out basically what it opens. The discovery of the key inspires Oscar to search all across New York for information and really for closure following his father's death. And again, this book was banned because of its vulgarity, apparently. But I actually read it, as I read quite a few banned books when I was a teenager, naturally. But obviously, I was a teenager in Romania, and this was before I'd moved to an English-speaking country, before basically everyone becoming hyper-aware of what happens in America thanks to social media. And when I read it for the first time, I genuinely didn't understand why it was banned because I didn't find it to be that graphic anyway. And I kind of had the same feeling with Catcher in the Rye. Like, I really didn't understand what was so controversial about these novels. To me, it was very much just about people with common sense. At the time, I just didn't understand American patriotism and Puritanism, so this puts it in a bit of perspective. And yet, I think this is a book that doesn't get mentioned so often, and we genuinely believe you should try and read it because it's about grief, and it's about finding closure, especially if you are very young. And Foer utilizes this child narrator in an attempt to connect with the struggle of processing the trauma that so many people faced after 9/11. And it is a really good perspective on how much of a journey processing grief can be, how long it can take, and how it can affect so many different characters in so many different ways. And yeah, this is Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close. Give it a try. At least it's gonna stand out a little bit more in your to-read list. Finally, our last banned book, The Grapes of Wrath, John Steinbeck. And really, just have a look at how pretty my 1932 version of the novel is. I actually found this in a charity shop, and yeah, it's one of my most prized book possessions. But anyway, aside from that, The Grapes of Wrath, if you're not familiar with the novel, it takes place in the 1930s. It tells the story of an Oklahoma family, the Jodes, and how they're driven from their homestead and forced to travel across America to the promised land of California. It's a family epic in the context of the Great Depression, and it explores so many systemic injustices that people who just want to make a living are facing. It is a timeless novel, and well, let's start with that. This is why you should read it, because it is a timeless novel. And funnily enough, this book wasn't even banned for that long. Even when it was banned, it wasn't really that hard to find. But where I wanted to end with it is because it's one of my favorite novels, and it's one of the few ones that I actually read periodically just because I find Steinbeck's writing to be exquisite. But like I said, it's timeless, and unfortunately the injustices and the conflict between the haves and have-nots, this is still just as present. The book was banned because Steinbeck himself wasn't really liked. He was on so many people's blacklists. Some people called him a communist, some people called him a talentless hack. Famously, Hemingway criticized him getting the Nobel Prize because, and according to Hemingway, who is never a trustworthy source, the Nobel Prize Committee just didn't have any other choice, so they went with Steinbeck. Yeah, no, hard disagree with that. Sorry, Mr. Hemingway. But the joke's is on them, because this novel is almost 100 years old at this point, and it still speaks to so many people across the world that, yeah, I mean, banned or not, this has to be on your to-read list. And there you have it. These are the banned novels that you absolutely need to read. What did you think? Have you read any of these? Are you planning to? What do you think about banning novels in general? Do you agree with the practice? Sound off in the comments down below. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, follow us on Instagram, and really, thank you for watching. See you next time, and stay salty.